Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we will be doing something a bit different. This will not be your typical deck guide video. This is going to be more like a sort of podcast type thing, where I'm going to talk about the cards that potentially could be nerfed in the upcoming balance patch. For those of you who don't know, I'm pretty sure it's every month or so. The Runeterra team will essentially patch cards. They will buff some cards, they will nerf some cards, and today we're going to be looking at the cards that are going to be nerfed. Now I'm also going to do a companion video to this, talking about cards that should be buffed, and as I say, this is mainly going to be more of a podcast type thing rather than perhaps a video. The video section not quite as important, but with that said, what we're going to do is go through every single region and talk about the individual cards which I think might see some nerfs. It's important to note that obviously this is my opinion, and many of these cards won't get nerfed, I'm sure, as they tend not to nerf too many cards. These are cards that I think either could be nerfed in the future or should be nerfed now, and I'm going to talk about them. Some of them obviously will be surprises. I'm also going to talk about some that potentially a lot of people might think should be nerfed and I don't, and I'm going to explain why. Some of them are pretty open and shut cases, but the ones that are perhaps more contentious, I will discuss my reasoning for them. So let's get into the first region, which will be Bilgewater, and let's look at our first card that I'm going to talk about, Pilfered Goods. Now, Pilfered Goods, I'm sure you've all seen it at this point, maybe had it played against you, played with it, and I don't need to tell you that it is an extremely effective card at what it does. I will start off by saying I don't think this card will see a nerf, but let's talk about why this card might be problematic. Obviously, it has the potential to draw 2 cards from your opponent's deck, and obviously that's quite a strong effect for just 2 mana. Obviously you do have to get the plunder effect off, but even if you don't, you still draw a card from the enemy deck. Why is this card problematic? Well, many of you know that certain cards, particularly in Freljord, buff the top card in your deck, or there are some effects in the game that will affect the top of your deck, and so drawing from the top of the opponent's deck can essentially negate the effect of the card that they played before to do that to their deck, and also you get an extra statted unit or whatever that potentially you shouldn't have got. So what is a way to fix this? Well, a lot of people are suggesting either drawing from the bottom or drawing randomly from the deck, and I think this is a change that they could implement quite easily, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did that in this upcoming balance patch. However, I still think that this card would be quite strong even then, and I think this card might have to be 3 mana. I think we're going to talk about a similar card, Deep Meditation, a bit later on, where drawing 2 cards for 2 mana feels like very strong, and the requirements for both of those cards aren't that heavy for you at all. So I think making this card 3 mana would be pretty balanced, and I think, as I say, this one's a fairly open and shut case. I think drawing 2 cards is just pretty good anyway. You could argue that it's from the opponent's deck, so it's less likely to sync up with your strategy, but even then, people tend to run the good cards, so you're most likely going to get a good card. So one way we can view how balanced a region is of course by how many cards I'm going to be talking about, and for Bilgewater I think that's the only one that I would consider problematic now. I've got a big list here of all the ones that I even thought about including, Citrus Courier being one for Bilgewater, but only Pilfered Goods I have as the exact problem card right now for Bilgewater. That obviously could change as things change in the meta and such, but yeah, Bilgewater as a whole, I think, is in a good place. I'd consider Bilgewater like a good benchmark for strength that the rest of the regions should try and get to, but unfortunately not all of them are. So let's talk about Demacia, and the first card I'm going to include is one that you might not have thought about initially, and that is Single Combat. This is a card that I don't see many calls for people nerfing. I think people have just accepted that this is a good card, but I think this is a very, very powerful card, and any of you who play Demacia know that pretty much in any Demacia deck, this is a 3 of, and I think in any card that is an automatic 3 of in any deck should at least be up for consideration for a nerf. And this is one that I think at this point in time could very well potentially see a nerf. Now we've seen the rise of Concerted Strike, which is a 5 mana card, if I can spell Concerted. We've seen the rise of this card, Concerted Strike, which is also a very powerful Demacia card, but it's only begin to shine in prominence, and I think single combat has just become a card that has seen so much play that I think making this 3 mana could be the correct way to go. Now obviously, again, when you're nerfing a card, there's sort of 2 ways you can do it, right? You can change sort of the effect that it's doing, or you can change sort of the relative power, whether that be stats or mana cost of the card itself. With single combat, of course, it feels like there's only really one way to nerf this card, and that is to increase its mana cost, as the effect is quite solid in what it does. But with that said, I do think this card should be nerfed, but I don't think it will be. So let's talk about our next card, and that is Grizzled Ranger. Now this one will come to a surprise to absolutely no one. Even when this card was revealed, people thought this card seems a little strong. I remember when it first got revealed and I was like, ooh, summon a Loyal Badger Bear. What's a Loyal Badger Bear? And then they saw this and thought, what? How is this allowed? How is this allowed in any such way? And Grizzled Ranger is an interesting one, right? And this is a card that we can nerf in potentially a couple ways. Obviously, again, you could change mana cost, you could change the stats on Grizzled Ranger. My, I think, preferred way of nerfing this card, and I think that this card may see a nerf. Normally, I think designers like to let their new cards at least flourish for a bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't see a nerf. Just because designers like to make it out as if they, you know, oh, we didn't make any mistakes. You know, there's nothing too bad. And I don't think there is anything too bad. I don't think this card is completely busted. But I do think it's very, very strong and may need to see a nerf. Now, you could increase this to make it a 5-mana 5/1, let's say, or something like that. My problem with that is Demacia has a lot of 5-drops. And it also has Quinn and another 5-drop scout, the moose thing, I can't remember its name, Great Horn Companion, something like that. And so I highly doubt they'll make this 5 mana. I just highly doubt that they would ever do that, because you can't have, you know, they obviously like to pair these things up, and you can't have all your scouts pretty much be 5 mana. That seems quite excessive and kind of makes the whole idea of scouts completely unviable and has no synergy, whereas, you know, right now it's 3, 4, and 2 5s, and that's fine. And even 2 with Valor, so in theory you could go 2, 3, 4, 5 with scouts. But if they made this 5, you know, you've got all of a sudden so many 5s and no 4, that makes it quite bad. So I imagine that this will stay 4 mana. So what can we do if this is staying 4 mana? Of course, you could change perhaps the Last Breath effect to be something else, but that kind of goes against what the card is. Of course, we look at the art, and you've got Badger Bear is by the Ranger, and that's kind of the whole thing. And this is where my preferred version of a nerf comes, and that is to change Loyal Badger Bear to a 3/4. What would this do? Well, of course, making Badger Bear a 3/4 nerfs 2 cards in 1, and Demacia is a very strong region, and Badger Bear itself is a very strong card. Now, for those of you thinking, that's an interesting way of doing it, that's not how I would have done it. Badger Bear is a very, very clear example of power creep, and not that, you know, not excessive power creep. Power creep is fine, and they're only adding 10 cards to each region, so it was fine. That they did have to make these cards somewhat strong. But I think making Badger Bear a 3/4, first of all, it aligns it with good old Golden Crushbot. Golden Crushbot is a 3 mana 2/5, 7 worth of stats. If we look at Badger Bear, he is a 3 mana 4/4. That's 8 worth of stats. So they both have no text, but one just has more stats than the other one. You know, is that justifiable? Do I think they should change Golden Crushbot? Possibly. And obviously we have to think about this in terms of what each region represents, of course, as well. Demacia obviously represents the region of stronger units in general. And so therefore, you could argue that Badger Bear, you know, deserves some level of love in that sense, and you know, Demacia deserves higher statted units than P and Z, because that's the way it works. But I think in that one fell swoop, just to change this to a 3/4, it would still be a powerful card, just because 4 health is obviously a crucial thing in this game. There aren't many deal 4s. There are plenty of ways to deal 3. There are a lot of 2 mana 3/2s. There's nothing with 4 attack. There aren't that many 3 manas with 4 attack either. And if you make this a 3/4, also with a 3 attack, it still blocks fearsome. It's still very viable in that sense. It kind of hits the exact right numbers. A 3-4 is a very powerful stat line in this game that you don't see very often. And it would also nerf Grizzled Ranger at the same time, because now he's only summoning a 3-4, and so I think this is my preferred method of nerfing this card, which I think will potentially need to see a nerf. So next up we have Citria the Bold. Now again, one that will come as no surprise, and as I say, judging by how many cards I make on this list for each different region, you can kind of tell how strong a region is, and I think this is quite a good way of finding out how strong a region is. And as I say, I don't expect all these cards to be nerfed. This is one that I think could potentially see a nerf, and I think I would like it to see a nerf. It doesn't need to be a massive nerf. I'm happy with the ability. It's got a very strong ability. I think this should be a 6-mana 5/5 or a 6/5. So I think this health stat needs to come down to 5, just so it makes it more likely that Citria Bold can't attack twice. I don't need to explain why this card is powerful. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have played against this card and felt its power rain terror upon you. And for a 6-mana card that is a 6/6, so it's perfectly statted as well, it has the perfect abilities. Now you can compare this to something like Genevieve Elmhart, which is also a pretty powerful card, but essentially it's just a worth Citria. And I think the problem with Citria right now is that if you're playing Demacia really in any sort of unit based way, she is sort of negating ever going into something like Genevieve, even if you were playing a Scouts deck. Even if you're going full Scouts, you would still rather have Citria, and I think that there needs to be some level of allowing things like Genevieve Elmhart to live in a deck and find her own place in the deck, or other 6-drops from other regions as well, rather than just plowing in Citria the Bold. So that's my thoughts on Citria. This one could take some time. This is a card that if you go on Runeterra Reddit, you will see complained about pretty much about as much as any other card. It is Unyielding Spirit. It's an 8-mana burst speed spell. Grant an ally I can't take damage or die. This is a very popular card to see a nerf. People don't like this card. They want it to be fast speed. They don't want it in their game. They think it's not think it's anti-fun. They think it's not interactive enough, and I disagree completely. I would hate to have this card see a nerf. I know that's maybe an unpopular opinion, but I really don't think that this card should see a nerf. I don't think it's anti-fun at all. I think people who say it's anti-fun are always on the opposite end of Unyielding Spirit. I think it's quite a fun card to play around with, and when you play it, and when you find the time to play it, it's not just an automatic, I'll play it on Fiora and now I've won. That isn't how the game works. And if you play with this card with Fiora, you know that, because against any deck that has any semblance of aggressive units, you don't win. You lose those games, and that is the problem. And here's the thing: in Runeterra, control beats aggro, aggro beats combo, and combo beats control. Now, I don't like Karina control. Fiora Unyielding Spirit is a great way to beat Karina control. It is an amazing way because they will play a lot of small units for you to kill. And that is a combo deck that will beat the likes of control. And there has to be some good combo decks in there to be able to beat control, unless you all just want to see Karina control matchups play endlessly over and over and over again, which I personally do not. So, I think Unyielding Spirit provides a strong combo deck to flourish, and I think that is important. And it also makes Fiora a viable champion. I know she's seen play in Bannerman, but essentially she's just a tiny piece in that Bannerman deck puzzle. She's like the least important card, and you'd probably rather see Badger Bear than Fiora anyway in most times. So that isn't her deck, but I want Fiora to have her own deck. I think people just don't like losing to Fiora, but playing with Fiora is a lot of fun. And Unyielding Spirit is not uninteractive. The game, there is pretty much no card that they could print that would make this game uninteractive unless it said take an extra turn. That's the only way I can see them printing a card that says no interaction, because the game is all about interaction. Even with it, if they said take an extra turn take an extra attacking turn, which essentially, I guess, is what rally is in a way. Obviously, there's still interaction. The whole game is based around, I pass it back to you. You now get a chance to respond to anything I do. The game can't be uninteractive. I know that people will say there isn't a lot of answers to this card, and by turn 5 you've lost the game. It's just not true. If someone plays this with Fiora, it's a massive tempo loss. They've done nothing. They've done nothing with their turn. They've just got a Fiora now that can't die. You've got the chance to potentially develop 3 units. And you might say, oh Chris, but those 3 units will die next turn. That doesn't have to be the case either. You can respond to a Fiora taking your unit and trying to kill it, and kill your own unit if you have to. Glimpse Beyond is obviously an obvious choice, but if they're about to win the game, you can Mystic Shot your own unit, and I know people will say, oh, but that's just a massive tempo loss. Well, yeah. But what's wrong with the card that potentially can win a game? What's wrong with a combo deck winning? I think people just don't like combo decks in general, because people complained about Ezreal for the same thing, right? That you can be on 18 health and lose without ever having the chance to interact. That is less interactive than this card is, and I personally wouldn't like to see this card change. If it changes to fast speed, it'll never see play. It just would never see play. Ever again. I think if you were going to nerf this card, what it probably would have to be is, say something like, you probably have to reduce the mana cost and make it something like, the next time I die, or like, the next time I would die, I don't die. Exactly, something like that, right? I think that's the way, if you did want to nerf this card, I think that would be a sort of fair compromise. That way, obviously, you know you have to kill a unit twice, and so it's still quite a big commitment, but it would probably have to be less than 8 mana if it was that. But yeah, I think if you're going to nerf the card, that's how it would be, but I personally, not a fan. Not a fan of nerfing this card, really, at all. So with time against me here, we'll move into Freljord, and really, with Freljord, there's only one card that you consider nerfing, and that's They Who Endure, and this one's a pretty easy one. I personally don't think it needs a nerf, but if you did want to, you just make it 7 mana and call it a day, and that's pretty much it. 7 mana wouldn't hurt the card too much, but I guess, you know, it has to come out on turn 7 instead, but normally it doesn't come out till potentially even later than that anyway, so that's it for Freljord. Not much to say. Ionia, though, there is a lot more to say. We could be here for some time. And we're actually going to start off with Zed, and Zed is probably another one that you're thinking, whoa, what are you talking about? Why are we looking at Zed here? And Zed, and I'm going to bring this up with Elise as well. I don't like Zed and I don't like Elise for the same reason, and essentially that is that their unleveled version is too good, and their leveled version doesn't change enough and doesn't make them as good. Now, Elise, I will say her leveled version does make her better, and that's why I think she is better than Zed overall, but I think both of them suffer from the same thing, that their unleveled version is essentially what you're playing the card for, and I don't like that. I like, because if you look at every other champion, most of the time you're playing for their leveled up condition, you're playing to level them up. With Zed you don't care, with Elise most of her value you don't care, and I think that's a problem. I think that's why they need to change Zed. My personal, I'm not sure that they will, because I'm not sure many people think of it that way, but this is just more of a design point rather than Zed being too strong. The way I would do it is have Zed summon a Living Shadow when you play him, and then, you know, you might want to bump him up to like a 3/3, summon an extra 3/3 when you play him, but that thing dies, and he just has to Nexus Strike once, and then he becomes a 4/4, let's say, that every time he attacks will summon a 4/4 as well. I think that would be better for the game, and would make Zed less good, essentially, just in his unleveled form. But that's Zed. I highly doubt he will see a change. Let's talk about Karma, though. Karma. Oh, Karma. This one's very tough. How do you change this card? Increase of mana doesn't do too much. Less stats doesn't do too much, because obviously her power comes from when you play a spell. Cast it again on the same targets, and it has to be turn 10. So any mana change, I mean, unless it got ridiculous and was like 10, which I highly doubt they do as well, unless they, you know, buffed its stats up, buffs Karma's stats up a lot, which people won't want to see either. Yeah, this one's a tough one to change. My ideal change is that they maybe could make it 6 mana, and that wouldn't, you might think, not change a lot, right? But it does mean that they get one less random spell if she does live from 6 to 10, so it's a slight nerf. And even if they play it later on in the game, obviously it costs more mana, so they can do less on that turn, etc. So I would make a 6 mana. I would also have it so that these random spells in hand the opponent can see. I think this is something that they could do again with pilfered goods potentially if they wanted to as well. And a lot of these creating random things, I think having the opponents see it, if any of them become too good, would be a way to nerf this card. And I think that's a way that they can nerf Karma. And it's a tough one because I don't like Karma personally, but I think if they did do something like that, which I think is perfectly reasonable and something that they might look into, it could be a way to change Karma without completely destroying the card. Next up, Eye of the Dragon. This is one that I've seen some call for nerfs on Reddit. Personally, I'm not that big a fan. I think this is fine as it is right now, and I think a nerf would be very simple. You just change the Dragon Links to 1/1, and that's that. But personally, I don't think this will get nerfed, and I don't think it needs to right now. A card that does need a nerf, however, and one that I think potentially could get a nerf, is Shadow Assassin. Again, very easy for me. Make it a 2/1. Simple as that. Make this a, very easy to kill. Dies to Vile Feast all of a sudden, Static Shock, Parlay, lots of things deal 1 damage, and you Twisted Fate. But Maiden, a lot of things would all of a sudden kill this and potentially ruin its value. It would still be a perfectly fine card. I don't think the difference between 2 and 1 would completely destroy this card, but it would make it a worse card. And I potentially see them doing this, as it just makes a lot of sense because this card is kind of a bit too good for what it is right now. Speaking of cards that might be too good for what they are right now, Deep Meditation. Oh my. This one, again, I think is pretty easy. I would think that this card probably does need to see a nerf. It's another one that when people first saw it, everyone was like, whoa. Well, that's just really good. And so I think that this one, again, pretty easy. Change it to 5/3. I know they wanted this kind of like everything costing 2 mana type thing, as you see that with quite a few cards. I think they wanted a bit of a synergy there, but Deep Meditation doesn't really fit in with it. Ionia in general doesn't really fit in with it. So I think making this 5/3 is probably the way to go with this card. Now let's talk about one that I could probably write a book about, to be honest. This card is probably the one I want to see nerfed most. If they said, Chris, pick a card to nerf, you can only pick one, it probably would be Will of Ionia. And it's not the strongest card. It's not the strongest card of them. It's not. It's actually essential in some instances, as we talked about with Unyielding Spirit. It's one of the few ways that you can deal with stuff like that, with those permanent buff effects. But I do need to see it changed. I really, really, really wish this was 5 mana. And this goes back to a debate that for those of you who are new to the game won't know, but Deny, once upon a time, cost 3 mana. And a lot of people wanted this card to become 4 mana. And a lot of people were on the other side of it and said, you can't make this card 3 mana. It'll ruin the game. It didn't ruin the game. It made the game way better. Because Deny was completely busted at 3 mana, because of course you can keep 3 spell mana up all the time. And so making Deny 4 mana vastly improved the game, and I think a similar thing will happen with Will of Ionia. Or I hope it does at least. Please, I beg you. I don't think it will, but I'm begging them, please do it. Because this card, as I say, it's not the most powerful card. It's not because this card is too powerful, it's just because it ruins things. Freljord is the weakest region. I don't need to point that out. As we went through these regions, you saw there was only one card that I wouldn't even consider changing from Freljord. But Will of Ionia kills Freljord. Freljord is half about buffing things. Well, if you just Will of Ionia it, it doesn't keep those buffs. Will of Ionia kills Braum. It kills Fiora. It's essentially Vengeance, but better on those cards almost. It's a 4 mana Vengeance on those cards. And you can't have 4 mana Vengeance cards, it just doesn't work. And this kind of effect, what I like about Runeterra so much is that buffs are worth using. If you go to any other card game, pretty much anyone that I know of at least, I mostly came from Magic, and so that's where my experience is. In Magic, you would never see a card that didn't have, when I'm summoned, do X. When I'm played, do X. And you would never see, buffs used on creatures in constructed play. That's ludicrous, because they'll just kill it, or they'll do this to it. They'll blink it. And so, yeah, Will of Ionia, I wish it was 5 mana. I think it would improve the overall health of the game. It would help it would help Freljord a lot. It would help stuff like Braum live. It would allow the game to flourish in those strategies. But it also needs to stay competitive. You can't nerf this card out of Obliteration, because then those Unyielding Spirit Fiora combos might become too good. I highly doubt that, because I think at any point an aggro deck would just come out and beat him. But yeah, this is one that I really hope sees a nerf, personally. And so we come to Noxus, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is the 1-drops. I've seen people, mostly with their frustration with burn aggro, talk about how these 3 1-drops might need some nerfs. They're wrong. These 3 1-drops are absolutely fine as they are. They aren't super strong. They're fine. I think it's just people are fed up with burn aggro rather than these cards actually being that strong. The strongest one of them is probably Precious Pet, and gets hard countered by a lot of stuff, so it's not that big of a deal. I wouldn't nerf them at all. One for interesting discussion, and potentially, I don't think we'll see a nerf, but could maybe, is Crimson Disciple. Anyone who's played against this card knows that this card is really, really strong, particularly paired with the Demolitionist, of course. And I would say it itself doesn't probably need a nerf. I think, again, if you were going to nerf something of this combo between a Demolitionist and Disciple, I think the way to do it is to make Demolitionist a 2/2. That makes this card a little less viable, perhaps, and so it wouldn't just pop up everywhere that you were playing Crimson Disciple. And obviously would make it easier to block against aggro decks. So, having talked about Demolitionist as well, that's it for Noxus. So, on to P and Z. Now, here's another region we could spend a long time on. And we'll start with 3 champions. First of being Ezreal. Ezreal, does he need a nerf? I would say right now, probably not. But I think if you were going to nerf Ezreal, it would simply be increasing the targets. I think that would be the way to do it. That would be the most efficient way of doing it. I know a lot of people would probably want to see his card changed from this, but I see it as more of like a race, right? Again, with these combo decks, it's a race. If they start to get off their combo, you know you have to start being as aggressive as possible to potentially beat their combos. And when you're playing against Ezreal or Fiora combo decks, it's important to keep that in mind, and keep in mind, okay, most likely all their answers are going to be probably sort of fast speed or even burst speed. So often developing is the right choice. And it's when if these decks start getting slow answers that are just very good as well, then of course we'll see nerfs. But right now I think Ezreal's probably fine, and if you did want to nerf him, just increase the targets to 9 or 10. Heimerdinger, another one that I'm not thrilled with the design of Heimerdinger either, because again, the difference between his unleveled and leveled version is pretty small. Pretty much the only major benefit from leveling up Heimerdinger is that it becomes 4 health, and I suppose nowadays there is a lot of ways to deal 1 damage, and therefore, you know, kind of ruins his turrets, but if they're leveled up, I guess it's fine. But again, I'm not sure I would love to nerf Heimerdinger. If you wanted to, you'd just make him 6 mana. I think that would be fine. But as I say, I'm more concerned with his sort of design being kind of similar, and not really doing that much different. But yeah, you could just make him 6 mana if you wanted to nerf him. Now let's talk about one that definitely needs a nerf, and that's Vi. Vi 100% needs a nerf. Vi is very similar to old Hecarim. Those of you who didn't play the game when Hecarim was the scourge of the land. Essentially, Hecarim was strong to the point where it didn't matter if you were playing Ephemerals, didn't matter if really you were in Shadow Isles. You just slap in Hecarim to any deck. It's kind of a finisher, a closer, because he was strong enough to do so. Vi is reaching that level, and potentially has already reached that level. As she's seen, you know, in Bannerman decks, they're just slapping in Vi just because she's super strong. Why wouldn't you play Vi? And so Vi is one that I like her abilities. I like the design of the card. I think it's a really cool idea for a card, and I love her level up condition as well. Seems really cool. Obviously, this would just be a change in numbers, whether this be 6, whether this be 4. Either way is fine. I don't really have a preference that much. But Vi probably does need a nerf. Onto a card that will surprise none of you. Boom Crew Rookie. I mean, I think a change that a lot of people have suggested, and I think one that they will definitely do. And I definitely, if you had to make a bet of which card will be nerfed, it would 100% be this card, as it's just been a very, very strong, probably the best 2-drop in the game, aside maybe from Elise, one of the two of them. And I think Boom Crew, the change is very simple. Just make it a 1/3. You might even want to make it a 2/3 in all honesty. Is there a 1/3 in the game? I think Shady Character might be the only 1/3 in the game that I could think of anyway. There might be more. The 4 health is too much, but if you make it a 1/3, is it too weak? Maybe. I wouldn't be shocked if they made it a 2/3, but even then I think it'd be more balanced, because there's a lot of 2-mana 3/2s that could then just block it and deal with it, and it's over, and it's fine. I think they'd be cautious to make this a 1/3, because then all the 2-mana 3/2s would just, it gets some value, but not great value. It's like, you know, it's like a used cast salesman, but worse, I guess, in the kind of decks it would want to fit into. So I wouldn't be shocked if they made it a 2/3 either, but that would make it more balanced and easier to kill. Mystic Shot, this is one that I've seen people call for potentially a nerf. Personally, I'm not a fan. I've seen people say, oh, Mystic Shot needs to just deal 2 to any unit. That would kill the card. It wouldn't be a good card at all. Wouldn't see any play, and I think that would nerf it completely to oblivion. I think keep it as, no reason to change it. And then I've also seen some pretty ridiculous calls to nerf Karina as well. She doesn't need nerfing. She's fine. I know you don't like Karina Control, neither do I, but she's not that strong, and we will talk about her partner. So now we come to Shadow Isles, and I've talked about Elise enough here. You can tell I think Elise is too strong, and I think anyone who's played this game since, you know, the start of open beta, or even earlier than that, knows that Elise has always been very strong, and continues to be, and fits in control decks, and fits in mid-range decks, and fits in aggro decks. And therefore, a card like that, I think, is just too strong. Simple as. And I think the way to change it, take off Fearsome on her unleveled. I think this is a change that makes so much sense. She's trying to disguise herself here, surely, as a princess, and the hapless aristocrat follows her around, and so is she Fearsome at that point? I'm not sure. Whereas when she changes to a spider, she becomes Fearsome. I think that would fit the card. I think it would fit pretty much everything, and I think would also make the card worse. And therefore, better for us all, I think. As changing any stat line or anything like that, I think would probably be a bit too much overall. I'm not a fan of this, but obviously if you make her a 2-mana 2/3, all of a sudden the 2-mana 2/3 that you've played can now block her if she doesn't have Fearsome, and, you know, weaken the card, but not substantially, just a little bit. Next up, I saw some calls to nerf Atrocity. Bit of a weird one. I don't really see why this card would ever need a nerf, to be honest. I think it's fine at 6 mana. Yes, it combos well with certain cards, Ledros, Nautilus, but I think they who endure. But I think it's necessary somewhat, because otherwise, if you didn't have this card, those decks would just be a lot worse. I think, you know, generally playing big units in card games for a lot of mana has tended not to be good, and Atrocity is sort of a way of at least giving you a chance at making them good. Because if you don't have Atrocity, there's so many counters. I mean, Frostbite counters them both, stuns would counter them, recalls would counter them. It would just be so many things. Like, you need to have something like this in the game, you know, to deal with stuff like Will of Ionia as a counter to it. And finally, we are going to end with the big man himself. That is Commander Ledros. This card used to be 8 mana. Did you know that? Do you remember when this card was 8 mana? That was like the first nerf they did, I think, was Ledros and Rasa. Rasa used to be 7, Ledros used to be 8, and they were absolutely broken, particularly in Expedition. Oh my god, I imagine Ledros is still pretty broken in Expedition. This needs to be 10 mana. I think if Ledros was 10 mana, it'd be just a lot cooler in a lot of ways. A 10 mana, 10/6, and I like the sort of symmetry of making it a 10 mana 10/6. You know, they're on full health, but this one card can deal all your health in the space of one turn. I think that's just a cool idea. Now, if they did want to nerf this card, and something that's kind of interesting about this card is a nerf would actually maybe be to make it like 7 health. It doesn't sound like a nerf to increase something's stats, but this thing dying is sort of worse than it living a lot of times, and can actually win games when it doesn't live, particularly in sort of control showdowns, where you can just about block Ledros, but sort of almost whose Ledros dies first. So that could be something they play around with, but I think safer bet is to just make it 10 mana, make it 10/6. I know a lot of you might think that doesn't change that much. The difference between 9 and 10 isn't that much, and it isn't. That's true. But, it is one extra turn that you can't do anything, and now all of a sudden, if they, Karina control deck didn't draw Karina either, they've got an extra turn of not knowing what to do. And they've got an extra turn of, having to wait, and they get less potential mana to do other things on the turn that they play at Ledros. And I think it would just, one, be more symmetrical, and therefore more pleasing and more intuitive to be like, oh, this 10 mana card halves your Nexus. It has 10 attack as well, so it can potentially kill you in one turn, even from full health. I think that would be a nice, cool symmetry, and also be a little nerf to the card, because I don't think it's completely bonkers, but the card could see maybe a little nerf. And so that is all of them. That's every single card that I think potentially could see a nerf. Some of them I think definitely should, but some of them won't, by the way. They won't nerf this many cards. I predict they probably will nerf somewhere in the region of around either 3 to 5, 3 to 6, something like that. I couldn't see it being any more than that, and I've mentioned a lot of cards here that potentially could see nerfs, so don't expect all of them. Leave a comment about what you think should be nerfed. And as I say, I'm going to do a sister video to this sort of podcast thing again on cards that I'd like to see buffs, and that's what's much more exciting, I think. I think buffing cards is much more exciting than nerfing cards, as I don't think there's too many cards. All the cards that I've mentioned today I think are strong, but not completely like out of the realm. Maybe Vi, maybe Deep Meditation are the 2, maybe Boom Crew Rookie as well. Sort of the 3 that I would like say, okay, let's really change this up. But aside from those 3, I don't think there's any cards that I'm like completely not okay with. But yeah, I'm going to do a sister video to this about buffing cards, and that's going to be a lot more exciting because you can get more wild with it and think about things a lot more. And so stick around for that, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. As I say, leave a comment with your suggestions. What needs a nerf? What doesn't need a nerf? It'd be interesting to hear your guys' opinion, spark some debate. And as always, I've been Chris. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video.